Like looking at them. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
absolutely. There's like a little feedback. Is there something going on in the background?
Um, no, I got my phone off, the iPad off. The only thing on is the laptop.
All right, perfect. So how long you been doing art, man?
Oh boy. Uh, just in general, probably 32 years since I could hold a pencil. I'm,
Right.
I'll be 38 this month. Professionally, about 20 years.
Nice.
Yeah, on different levels. I mean, when you start out, you do a lot of free stuff,
Yeah.
but I would say professionally, better part of 20 years.
I noticed a lot of your stuff's from the 60s as far as like your superheroes and stuff. Is there a reason for that?
When I grew up, we didn't have the most money. We were kind of poor, and I remember my brother. I have an older brother. He's 9 years older, and he would give me a lot of comics, that he would read, or we would find at like a garage sale or whatever. And a
Yes.
lot of them were like the older kind of like like the Jack Kirby, the kind of Steve Ditko, the stuff like that. And I just always liked, I liked that you would look at a panel and you would see that offset printing, and it was kind of like
Yes.
bleed outside the lines.
Yes.
And when I grew up and I learned how comics and stuff are colored now, like digitally,
Yes.
I was like, oh, that's not that impressive. Like it is, but I was like, oh man, like it took way more time to do it back in the day because you had less resources. Uh,
Absolutely.
I just like that look, and it's kind of
Yeah.
dying out. So I've tried to keep it alive a little bit.
Absolutely. That's kind of like when you watch Disney Plus and you go into like into the vault and you see the list of animators on something like,
Hmm.
you're like, man, in the 40s it was a totally different game.
Yeah, there's a series on Disney Plus. I think it's called A Day in the Life or something like that, and
Okay.
it profiles like people that work at the parks, people that do specific jobs, animators, and there's a segment with the animator. He worked on Aladdin. He was the lead designer for Genie,
Okay.
and he kind of just a short, kind of older, really round dude. Wears his pants up to here, and just kind of boisterous. And he was talking about his process for like designing the genie. And you see, he's still got his pencils and his paper, and he's doing like the kind of flipping the page, and
Yes.
it's just fun to watch. It's like, man, like,
Yes. The old style.
yeah, I don't have to do that now, but it would be fun to like bring that back, or like practice or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what was the turning point? What made you go professional?
Honestly, I just got tired of working jobs that I hated. I mean, the first job I ever worked, I was 14. I worked at Kmart
Oh man.
when Kmart was still a thing. And then I actually had a second job when I was 15, and I worked at like a little postal, not a post office, but like a postal place.
Yes.
And, I mean, at the time, I thought I was rich.
Right.
You're 14, 15, you're making like $200 or whatever, you think you're rich. And I just realized that, like, my heart's not into it. Like, I'm not passionate about this stuff. And like I would kind of feel like a scratch in my throat, like, oh, I could probably call in sick to work today.
Right.
And I mean, I've sold shoes, I've worked at video stores, I worked at party stores, and like every job that I've had, even if it was mundane, I've tried to. Like I worked at Kmart, that didn't work out, and then I went and worked at a party store. It's still retail, but at least it was a little bit more fun.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so like every job that I've had, I tried to make it a little better than the one before.
Yes.
Um, and I just got to a point where I was like, I've only got a little bit of talent, so I don't want to waste it selling shoes or whatever. And I would just draw stuff for people and like send it into magazines or back in the day, you had to like photocopy it and put it in an envelope, mail it, write a letter, uh,
Put a
and
stamp on it.
yep, yeah, and I remember like somebody was telling me like why don't you do this full time? But also at that time, a lot of people were like, you can't make any money doing that.
Right.
And I'm like, well, you never heard of Walt Disney, even though he kind of later became not so, or he was more of a visionary.
Yes.
Um, but I mean, it's like if you get paid to do what you love, then you're a lot more enthusiastic about it and you're a lot more into it. And it's cliche, but it's not really a job because
Yes.
you still do it. You know what I
Right.
mean? So that was a long time ago.
So during the times, has there ever been a point to where you were going to quit, or has it been all passion to where you loved it so much that hasn't been an option?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely don't get into art for money. Like, it's not, but I mean, again, like, I'm not old, but I'm old enough to remember, like, you know, sitting with copy paper and pencils in my bedroom drawing, or like, when I was a kid, I would trace coloring books because that's how I learned how to do shapes and stuff. Or I remember, God, in the 80s, watching like He-Man VHS and like pausing it. And I don't know if you remember, when you would pause it, you'd get that like static bar across
Yeah.
the screen, and you could only pause it for like 2 minutes. So I would pause it and I would try to draw what I saw on TV as fast as I could. And it's just kind of ingrained in me. And like as I've gotten older, I have other interests. Like I wanted to get into forensics because I really like, like stuff like that, like science. I wanted to be a writer, but I always kind of go back to, you know,
Art.
yeah, even if I'm writing something, I'm like, oh, I could probably draw, you know what I mean? It's like ingrained in my head.
Yes.
So I've thought about pursuing other things, but my brain is just wired to kind of go back to, my one true love, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your process? How do you stay on track? What has been the key to actually being successful at this?
That's a good question because the past couple months I've slipped a lot. I've had a lot of things happen in 2019 that kind of chip away. You know,
Right.
uh, Part of being self-employed, I think, is you have to kind of have thick skin and you have to be really mentally tough because there's a lot of what ifs. What if I can't pay my bills? What if I don't make enough money? What if somebody doesn't like this? What if somebody fires me? And you kind of have
Right.
to have enough mental fortitude to kind of like put your head down and go like, I hear it, but I'm still going forward. And the last couple years or the months have been really, really rough, like really taxing. And
Right.
um, I would say that things have suffered quite a bit. Like I haven't wanted to do anything, and the creativity's been sucked out of me, and so it's actually kind of interesting that you asked that because right now um, I'm kind of in like a rebuilding phase where I'm like, look, man, I've been depressed for about 6 months,
Right.
and I'm someone that has like massive anxiety, and it's funny because like I see people on Instagram or like social media. It's almost like anxiety is cool now. You know,
Right.
and I don't know if it's cool or that like mental health has become more of like this thing that people are being aware of, where it's coming out. Like, oh, I have anxiety or
A
whatever.
lot more accepted.
Yeah, and I hear about like, oh, I've got anxiety, I've got social anxiety, I've got this anxiety, I've got this, and I'm like, I usually just kind of keep my mouth shut about it because
Right.
I just presume like no one wants to hear.
So I'm kind of anxious about
Yeah,
it.
like listen, man, like I work for myself. I have a nice place to live. Like I get to do what I love. Like no one wants to hear me complain.
Right.
You know, um, and like I said, as of late, it's just been like I don't want to do anything, or what I just don't like, or I don't think it's good, or I'll submit it. I'm like I don't want to hear the feedback. and it's right now it's a lot of like rebuilding,
Yeah.
and the process is interesting now because um, I found that for someone like myself that doesn't like routines, like I get up at 7 and I have coffee, I don't really like that. I've kind of had to rely more on routines now, especially right now.
You gravitate towards it, right?
Yeah, like I make a lot of lists on my phone. I use that app Wonderlist, and I'm talking day, for the week, for the month. It's as simple as like make your bed, brush your teeth. Like I'll forget, but I feel this sense of accomplishment checking it off.
Yes.
And the more I check off, the more I feel better about myself, the more I feel creative, and the more I feel motivated to sit down and, you know, but once I get into it, I sit down and I look at my list of things to do, and I just start. I work on an iPad now.
That's the entire concept of the podcast. It's the little victories. It's exactly what you're talking about. The little things that you do to where you accomplish them, and that helps you get through your day, and
Yeah,
that puts you in position for a better opportunity.
right, exactly. So when you sent me the message, I was like, oh, that's interesting because, checking off today, like, make your bed. I'm like, ding, and I felt like this sense of I make my bed every day.
Right.
I always do, but just checking it off, I was like, I feel good about myself. Get gas, brush your teeth. I'm like, this is stuff
Yes.
I do, but it made me feel like, all right, I'm getting stuff done. Read for 20 minutes. Drink 90 ounces of water. And
Yes.
so it's exactly what you were talking about, and it builds me up towards say halfway through the day. Then I'm like, now I'm ready to sit down and work. But when I do, I mean, it's this little Apple Pencil and iPad is in front of me here, and I I usually have headphones, and I just kind of get into it. And
What what program do you use?
so I use it's called Sketchbook Pro, and then I use Procreate. Uh,
Okay.
Procreate's a lot more intense, but
Right.
it's probably the most incredible drawing program I've ever seen. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, you can animate in it now.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's it's a lot more labor intensive because of the tools.
Yeah.
But man, I mean, it's like I've seen people do incredible things in Procreate. Did you? I'm assuming you saw the movie Logan.
Yes.
Okay, there was a promotional poster for it that looked like an old kind of Western poster.
Yes.
I learned that was all in Procreate, and Procreate's
Right.
only available on an iPad.
Right.
So that's like that poster was done on an iPad in
Have you
Procreate.
tried? Have you tried Fresco yet?
Mm-mm. I've heard about it. What would you say the difference is?
I mean, I like Photoshop. I grew up on Photoshop. So then like there's a lot of features that are just like really nice to have the different interface. Like the way that the bucket is and the way that the bucket is accessible. And then like the way that you can go to the left and hit the different brushes. So like you'll have your regular brushes, your live brushes, and then your vector brushes, and it's just in different tabs.
Okay.
Oh no, some of the user interface is similar to where you can use two fingers to undo, blah 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 blah, and like I don't know, I think it's really a step above, and
Really?
but I'm really new to it.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I know people that use that. They use Clip Studio Paint.
Yes,
Uh, and there was another one that somebody recommended, and I'm like, man, I'm still trying to learn Procreate.
Procreate. Yes,
Let me get a hold on that, and then let me jump to this one, and I'll jump to this one because I like having options.
absolutely.
And I'm a big fan of blending. Like sometimes I'll sketch something in Sketchbook Pro. I'll
Yes,
get into Procreate. I'll take it from Procreate onto my Mac. From my Mac, I'll put in stuff from Illustrator, and I'll put in stuff from Photoshop.
yes.
And I like kind of patching everything together. You know,
So like when you put it in Illustrator, that's to tighten up the lines and create a shape or something, right?
it depends. Like a lot of, if you look at my Instagram, like anything that I've done that has like tight shapes. Like for instance, I posted a drawing that I did a couple years ago of Kylo Ren from Star Wars.
Yes.
and he's in the icon of the First Order, which I believe
Yeah.
is an octagon or hexagon. So what I did was and I drew him in Sketchbook Pro.
Okay.
I colored him. I brought him into Photoshop. I added some crazy effects to the lightsaber, but then I created the First Order badge in Illustrator because like I'm a sucker for clean lines.
Yes.
I created the badge. I brought that, married him in Photoshop, and then I just kind of erased Kylo Ren where I didn't want him to bleed out.
Yes.
Um, and I put it together, and people were like, "Man, you've got some really clean lines on that First Order badge." I'm like, "Dude, that's not hand drawn. Like,
Yeah.
that's all done with a mouse, man." You know.
So like something that I'll do that's kind of like a hack for my iPad is I'll take a sketch that I've done that I inked, right? That doesn't have the smoothest lines,
Mhm.
and I'll throw it into that Adobe Capture,
Mhm.
and I'll make a shape out of it and use the smoothing tool to smooth the edges. You ever
Yeah.
do something like that?
I don't do I. Somebody recommended that to me. I've kind of fallen in love more with non-perfect lines because like
Yeah.
again going back to when I was a kid, I mean I used to look at comics as like perfect works of art,
Yes.
and I used to think like, man, how do they know how to draw a gun or a car or a tree, like, you know.
Yes.
And I didn't realize that like people use reference, right?
Right.
And when I learned like, oh, like I saw Jim Lee, a picture of him, and he was looking at a picture of a gun as he was sketching it, and I'm like, oh, of course he
Yeah.
doesn't memorize every gun, like, you know. And then I learned about like, oh, well, his line work is perfect. It's like, no, that's because it shrunk down to this big. When you blow it up to the actual size, if you look at it, a lot of these lines don't connect. Some
Yes.
kind of janky, like,
Yes.
it was like, oh, well, I don't have to be perfect. And then I looked at the color, and I'm like, the color sometimes it bleeds. So I used to be like really hardcore about perfectly seamless lines,
Yes.
and now I find myself appreciating more where you can kind of see the where the artist left off and then picked up again.
Perfect.
Um,
Like the character in it.
yeah, it adds something to me of like, oh, that's where they left. That's where they picked their hand up,
Right.
or that's the pen they were using, or that's the brush they were using. And in Procreate, I bought a lot of those kind of like textured brushes,
Yes.
and I find myself like really liking that kind of grit. Because I basically would drive myself crazy trying to get perfect lines,
Right.
and I don't have that steady of a hand, so
No.
like whatever, they're gonna be weird, so it's fine.
So, what do you have coming up for 2020?
Oh boy, that's a good question. A lot of January is me trying to again kind of remotivate myself to get back into creating things. Like I'm not someone that really looks at social media as like a measuring stick for like how good of my work is.
Yes.
I think a couple years ago maybe I was more into it. Now I'm like, I don't really care. I post when I post, and you know,
Yeah.
I know that's not the way to build a following per se, but I don't really. I'm kind of too old for that shit, man. Like, uh, so I'm. I have on my list that I see a lot of these people doing Patreon. I never really understood what Patreon was.
Yeah.
Um, so I thought, well, screw it. I'll just do my own. Like it's not necessarily that something that like I need to do because it's gonna support me financially. It's something more that like I see other people doing, and I'm curious.
Yeah.
And if I learn, it's almost like I feel like, oh, well, I've added a tool to my arsenal.
Yes.
Same thing with YouTube. Like I've been asked for years, like, why don't you do a YouTube channel? And I'm like, I just don't care. I was kind of lazy. Um, and I,
Especially since you use Procreate.
yeah, pretty much, yeah. And I helped a friend launch his YouTube channel about 6, 7 months ago, and I've been doing editing for the videos. Very, very basic stuff, but it's a good thing to learn, you know.
Oh yeah.
I see a lot of people doing YouTube and they do these really extensive videos, and I think that's something that I'm going to do. I just don't want to be that guy that's like, and it's no knock on anybody else because everybody has their thing and I get it, and there are people that are way, way more successful than me or like way more better off than I am. But I don't want to be that guy that has like, hey everybody, come look at me, and you play a character.
Yes.
I just find that obnoxious. Like I
Right.
think that when I draw these or when I see these guys drawing and they give you this lecture beforehand and they're like in character, I just sit there and I'm like, just fast forward, man. Like I don't care.
Right.
Uh, so I was working today on redesigning a YouTube page, trying to figure out how the hell to do Patreon. I don't even know what it is really. like,
That's the beauty of it, though. To where like that's something that you don't like, so that's something that you're gonna avoid in your channel. So if you actually do make a channel, you're gonna give an option to where you have someone that's authentic. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, that's what somebody told me, and I feel like a lot of these guys that I see that I'm talking about, like, it's not that they're inauthentic. It's that,
They're trying to fill the TV persona.
yeah, it's like placating to. Oh man, it's gonna sound really bad, but it's almost like they're placating to children because children want excitement. They want like loud noises. They want brightness.
Yes.
And again, it's no knock because like there are people that I'm like, this guy's got 1.7 million followers, and that's great. That's awesome.
Amazing.
That's
Yes.
amazing, and he's making cash like you wouldn't believe. But that's just not. I don't have that personality to where
No.
it's, I'm more like, look, let me sit down, let me do my thing. If you want to watch, watch. If you don't, don't. Um,
Right.
you know. So Patreon, YouTube. I want to get back into doing a piece of art a day, even if it's like a sketch.
Nice.
Uh, let's just say 2020 is going to be the year of the little victories.
Nice.
So this is kind of perfect that you asked me because it's trying to teach myself to crawl again before I try to run a marathon.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, dude, checking off getting gas today, I was like, I was like so proud of myself. I'm like, I'm ready to go home, and I vacuumed my floor, and I'm like, little victory, you know.
Yes.
So you kind of picked a perfect time. So 2020, I think, will be little victories leading into big accomplishments, hopefully.
Well, thank you for your time, sir. I appreciate you being on episode one.
No problem. I appreciate your time too.
Have a good day, bud.
You too, man. Thanks a lot. Good talking to you.
Thank you, bud.